Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something you might not typically think of as super interesting sales compensation.
Yeah.
But trust me, this isn't your usual boring business stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to uncover some pretty surprising insights from research that really challenges how things are usually done.
Oh, yeah.
You sent over a fascinating article, and it's called "It's Time to Update the Sales Agent's Compensation" by Dr. Richard Konda.
Yes.
So get ready to rethink some of those old assumptions about sales compensation.
Definitely. What I find so fascinating about this is like how we pay salespeople has pretty much stayed the same for I don't know how many years, decades even.
Right, yeah.
And despite all this research showing that, well, it might not be the best approach.
Okay, so let's break that down a bit. You're saying that even with all this research out there, companies are kind of stuck in the past when it comes to how they pay their sales teams.
Exactly. The old way of doing things, the one that's heavily based on commissions and incentives,
Yeah.
that's still the go-to for a lot of organizations. But like Dr. Conde's article points out, this could be doing more harm than good.
So are you telling me those big commission checks might not be the magic solution everyone thinks they are? What kind of harm are we talking about here?
Well, take a look at the turnover rates in sales. HubSpot reports a crazy 35% turnover rate,
Wow.
and that's 3 times higher than other departments.
35. That's wild. That definitely says something's not quite right?
Yeah, it does.
So if those huge commissions aren't the answer, what is? Dr. Tande's article mentioned autonomous motivation. What is that all about?
Now, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Autonomous motivation comes from this thing called self-determination theory,
Okay.
which is all about what truly motivates us as people. It's about feeling like you're in control of your own work and pursuing goals that match up with what you believe in. It's that inner satisfaction you get from doing something meaningful to you, not just chasing external rewards.
So it's more about connecting with the work itself rather than just hitting some sales target.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, Daniel Pink in his book Drive talks about this too. This mismatch between what science tells us about motivation and what businesses actually do.
Right.
He says we need to tap into people's intrinsic drive, that desire to do things because they're meaningful and engaging.
It reminds me of when I worked in sales. The times I felt most motivated were when I really believed in the product I was selling and felt like I was actually helping customers. The commission was a nice bonus, but it wasn't the biggest motivator.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. And there's research to back that up.
Oh, wow.
Studies by Kuvaz and others, along with Dr. Conde's own work, found a negative link between people who earn a lot from incentives and both job satisfaction and how long they stay in a job.
Wait, so people who earn more through incentives are actually less satisfied and more likely to leave? That seems counterintuitive. Why would that be?
Well, think about it. If you're constantly chasing that next commission, it can be super stressful, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You might start neglecting other important parts of your job, like building relationships with customers or even just developing your skills.
Right.
Because you're so focused on closing that next deal, it's like having tunnel vision. You can't see the bigger picture.
That makes sense. It's like that salesperson who's just trying to make a quick sale but forgets to actually connect with the customer and then loses them in the end.
Precisely. And that short-term thinking can impact the entire organization in a negative way. So the question is, how do we move away from this model that relies so much on incentives and actually tap into that autonomous motivation we were talking about?
Great question. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss right after this.
All right.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential problems with a model that's all about incentives. What's the alternative? How do we get to that autonomous motivation we were talking about?
Well, one thing that Dr. Conde and other researchers suggest is moving towards higher base salaries. This gives salespeople a sense of security and stability, so they can focus on the bigger picture. They're not constantly worried about chasing that next commission check.
Okay, that's interesting. But wouldn't a higher base salary just make people complacent? If they don't have to worry about hitting commission targets, won't they just coast?
I know that's a common concern, but the research actually shows something different. Studies by Gagne and Forrest, they found that higher base salaries can actually boost productivity, help with retention, and lead to better overall performance.
Really? Wow, that's surprising. How does that work?
It goes back to that idea of autonomous motivation.
Okay.
When people feel like they're paid fairly, they're valued, they're more likely to be engaged and motivated to do their best work. They feel a sense of ownership and responsibility, not like they're just chasing a carrot on a stick.
So it's about creating a sense of intrinsic motivation and empowerment. They're not just working for a paycheck. They're invested in the company's success and their own growth.
Exactly. And remember, shifting away from a purely incentive-driven model doesn't mean we get rid of performance goals. It's about finding better ways to track and measure success, ways that align with what the company wants to achieve and that encourage a more holistic approach.
So instead of only looking at how many deals someone closes, you might consider things like customer satisfaction, or how well they retain customers over time, or even how much they contribute to the team's goals, right?
Precisely. It's about going beyond just the numbers and looking at the quality of their work and how it impacts the whole business. And there are tools out there to help with this. Like some companies use CRM systems, to track not just sales figures, but also things like customer engagement and feedback. This gives you a much more complete picture of how a salesperson is actually doing.
That makes sense. It's moving from just thinking about transactions to focusing on relationships, where things like building trust with customers and working with them over the long term are just as important as just closing a deal.
Exactly. And let's not forget, motivation isn't all about the money. Things like recognition, opportunities to grow and learn new skills, and just having a positive work environment, all these play a big role in how well people perform.
So it's about building a culture where salespeople feel valued and supported, and where they feel empowered to do their best.
Absolutely. And when you have that kind of environment, you're more likely to attract and keep top talent, which in the end helps everyone succeed. It's a win-win.
This all makes me think about some of the companies that are already doing this. Dr. Condi's article mentions some examples like Basecamp, Zapier, and Buffer. They've all moved away from those traditional commission-heavy models, and they seem to be doing really well.
Yeah, they're great examples of companies who are willing to shake things up a bit.
Yeah.
Like Basecamp, they've gotten rid of individual sales commissions altogether. Everyone on the team gets a really good base salary instead.
Wow, no commissions at all. That's pretty radical. What's the thinking behind that?
Their philosophy is that everyone at the company contributes to sales in some way, so everyone should share in the rewards. They believe this approach creates a more collaborative and supportive environment where people work together towards a common goal rather than competing with each other.
Yeah, I could see how that would fit with the whole idea of intrinsic motivation and feeling like you're part of something bigger. Instead of just focusing on your own individual targets, you're all working together as a team to achieve success.
Exactly. And it's not just tech companies that are doing this. We're seeing a trend across all sorts of industries where companies are realizing that the old every salesperson for themselves mentality might not be the best way to do things anymore.
It's so interesting how this all challenges those traditional ideas about how to compensate salespeople. What about those salespeople who are really driven by those big commission checks? Wouldn't they resist this kind of change?
Yeah, it's true that some salespeople might be hesitant at first to move to a model with a lower commission structure. But if the base salary is competitive and the overall compensation package is good, it can be beneficial for everyone.
So it's about striking that balance where salespeople feel like they're being paid fairly, but are also motivated to help the company succeed in the long run. Okay, so we've talked about why it's important to rethink the traditional way of doing sales compensation. Now let's talk about how to actually make that shift.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges companies might run into? For those listening who are thinking, okay, this all sounds good, but where do I even start?
Yeah, you're right. It's not always easy to make a change like this. One challenge is just, overcoming inertia. Sales compensation has been done a certain way for such a long time that there can be pushback from, leadership and even from the salespeople themselves.
Yeah, I can imagine. Some salespeople, especially those who are used to those big commission checks,
Yeah.
might be a little skeptical.
hmm
So what can companies do to kind of address that and get everyone on board with the new way of doing things?
I think transparency is key.
Okay.
Communicate clearly about the reasons for the change. Talk about the research that supports it, and explain how this new model will actually benefit everyone in the long run. And here's an idea. Why not involve the salespeople themselves in designing the new plan?
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah, get their input from the beginning.
That's a great idea. Make them feel like they're part of the solution, not like something is being forced on them.
Right, exactly.
It's about building that trust and ownership.
Absolutely. And don't forget about training and support. Salespeople need to understand how their performance will be measured and rewarded under the new system. Give them the tools and resources they need to succeed. Remember, it's not just about changing the way you pay people, it's about changing the whole sales culture.
Dr. Conde's article really emphasized that. He talked about taking a holistic approach to sales compensation. So it's not just about money, but also about building a work environment that's motivating and fulfilling for the people who work there. What would you say are some of the essential elements of that kind of environment?
Yeah, you're spot on. It's about creating a culture of collaboration, thinking long term, and putting the customer first. It takes commitment from everyone, from the CEO all the way down to the newest sales rep. Think about offering opportunities for professional development, recognizing and rewarding people for their contributions and fostering a sense of purpose and belonging. It goes beyond just the paycheck. It's about building a workplace where people feel valued and empowered.
Yeah. This has been such an insightful look into a topic that's crucial to any business, but often gets overlooked. The big takeaway for me is that maybe the traditional model of sales compensation isn't working as well as we thought it did. The research seems pretty clear. It's time for a change. What would you say to those who are ready to embrace this new way of thinking?
I'd say take a hard look at your current system. Ask yourself, is it really lining up with your company's goals and values? Is it helping you attract and keep the best people? Talk to your salespeople, find out what's working and what's not. Don't be afraid to experiment, to try new things. What works for one company might not work for another, so be open to adapting and adjusting as you go. And remember, building a strong, motivated sales team is a continuous process.
Well said. And everyone listening, as you think about what we've discussed today, here's something to ponder. If you were creating a sales compensation plan from scratch, what would be your top priorities to attract and keep top talent? What kind of environment would you create to build a successful and productive sales team? Keep those questions in mind as you continue to explore this topic. And that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.